Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? So over the weekend, the Saints coaching search staff, organization as a whole, got just like an avalanche of bad news. Joe Brady elected to stay in Buffalo, withdrawing from consideration. Candidly, I do wonder sometimes when I see stories like that if the coach is really staying put, or if they were advised they weren't going to get the job, and so that was an opportunity to save face or stay ahead of the resume. Just, I'm withdrawing from consideration means you weren't going to get the job. With Brady, I think that there was really a legitimate opportunity for him to get that job. But anyway, the other thing we saw over the weekend was a variety of hires of Saints current or former staff members to different places, and in some instances, lateral moves. Like, we saw Dennis Allen, the former Saints head coach, get the defensive coordinator job with the Chicago Bears. That's really interesting because, well, first of all, the Saints play the Bears next year, so they'll face off against Dennis Allen. And I think Dennis Allen has proven to be a really good defensive coordinator. It was always my contention with Dennis Allen. Lieutenant, not a general. And during his time in New Orleans, Dennis Allen was a very good defensive coordinator. There were a couple of years there, his last couple as a DC, where they were top 5 in both rush defense and pass defense. And he took over one of the worst defenses in the NFL in 2015 when Rob Ryan was fired, into 2016, and then turned the Saints into a consistent top 10 defense. Great defensive coordinator. I think it's a fantastic hire for Ben Johnson there in Chicago. But on top of DA, we've seen other coaches leave for what appears to be lateral moves. Now, Declan Doyle is also going to Chicago as the offensive coordinator. Ben Johnson is the head coach, and he's likely going to call plays and all that stuff. But Declan Doyle was a Saints offensive assistant who is going with Dennis Allen now as the offensive coordinator with the Chicago Bears. So DA and Declan Doyle are both in Chicago. But the bigger news was probably Klint Kubiak, and then what the Cincinnati Bengals announced on Monday, and that longtime Saints linebackers coach, Michael Hodges, is making a lateral move to Cincinnati. So Kubiak, if you missed it over the weekend, Klint Kubiak, after one season as the Saints offensive coordinator, has been hired as the new offensive coordinator in Seattle. Now, Seattle had hired Grubb, who was the offensive coordinator for the Washington Huskies. Kalen DeBoer hired him at Alabama, and before he ever coached a day at Alabama, he took the job as the OC with the Seattle Seahawks, and then got fired by McDonald after one season there in Seattle, despite the fact that the Seahawks were 10-7, whatever. And part of the fan reaction, or part of the scuttle around the Saints, were everybody's leaving, lateral moves, they can't wait to get out of town. And then the same thing happened with Michael Hodges, who on Monday was hired by the Bengals as their linebackers coach. He's been the Saints linebackers coach since 2017. Now he's going to Cincinnati as linebackers coach. And so the fear in the narrative is everybody's leaving. The reality is, I mean, you're bringing in a new coach who's going to hire his own staff anyway, right? I mean, the only real exception would be if the Saints retain Darren Rizzi. And I don't know that there's a great chance of that happening. Like, I'm pushing for that a little bit more here, not because I think Darren Rizzi's the right guy or the best guy for the job, but because I think that's a good one-year bridge as you tank in 2025 to have a more appealing job in 2026. Now, I don't know that the Saints are going to approach it that way, but it's what the Raiders just did. They retained Antonio Pierce for a year, and it was a bridge to their guy. The Patriots just did it with Gerard Mayo. I don't think necessarily that was their intention initially, but they promoted Gerard Mayo. I think they were projected to win 4 games. They won 4 games. And a better option, and Mike Vrabel was available, and so they hired Vrabel. It was a more attractive situation now this year. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. You retain, we've seen it in college. I mean, it happened with Zach Arnett at Mississippi State after Mike Leach's passing. They promoted Arnett. He was there for a year. It was a disaster. They were able to settle everything, and then they went and found their guy. Well, it remains to be seen if it's the right guy or if that's the right way to go about doing it, but I'm just saying it's not altogether out of the ordinary for this to happen. But if the Saints were to retain Darren Rizzi, then Rizzi would probably retain a lot of the staff. That's what Dennis Allen did. Remember, Dennis Allen got the job in 2021, or I guess after the 21 season, or going into 22. And he retained Pete Carmichael as his offensive coordinator. And he retained Ryan Nielsen, and they brought and Chris Richard and promoted them to co-DCs. And he retained Darren Rizzi as his special teams coordinator. He retained Michael Hodges as his linebackers coach. So, there was a lot of staff retention. And that was kind of intentional. It was part of why you kept Dennis Allen. It was to say, look, we've had this great run of success. Let's not upset the apple cart here. Let's see if we can kind of continue this run of success. And it didn't work. Objectively didn't work. But if you retain Darren Rizzi, you might have retained Klint Kubiak. You might have retained Michael Hodges. Those opportunities would be there if you retain Darren Rizzi. But that's kind of the only way. And if you don't retain Darren Rizzi, which, I mean, you look at the odds and everything, it seems like Mike McCarthy or now Kellen Moore are the guys that have shot up the odds list to be the next Saints coach. Who knows what they're going to do? I mean, Mickey feels a little unpredictable at this moment. But if, in fact, you hire anyone other than Darren Rizzi, all those coaches are going to be out of a job. So if you're Klint Kubiak, you're sitting there looking, going, all right, well, I mean, yes, I'm under contract with the New Orleans Saints, but look at all the people they're looking to hire. There's one guy that's a defensive coach, Anthony Weaver. That's it, the DC for the Dolphins. That's the only defensive-minded coach who might retain Kubiak. Everyone else, Mike McCarthy, offensive coach, probably bringing his own guy. Mike Kafka from the Giants, offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator. Cliff Kingsbury, offensive coordinator. I mean, you were pursuing Joe Brady, who elected to stay, but another offensive guy. I mean, everybody's been an offensive guy, except Anthony Weaver. So, I mean, Aaron Glenn was a defensive guy, but obviously he picked the Jets. But by and large, it goes to show you they're looking to hire an offensive coach. And if you hire an offensive coach, that guy's going to call plays or bring in his own coordinator, so Kubiak could probably be out of a job anyway. So he's just staying ahead of his resume. Seattle needed an offensive coordinator. It was bird in hand. He took it. I don't blame him at all for doing that. I think it's the smart thing for Kubiak to do. I'd say the same thing for Michael Hodges. He's been in New Orleans since 2017. He's actually tutored some really good linebackers when you think about it. Demario Davis has been awesome. I mean, you had Alex Anzalone, you had Caden Ellis, you had Zach Bond, although you didn't really develop Zach Bond here. He went to Philly and became, Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Pete Werner has been a good player for you since drafting him when he's been healthy. So he's a good coach, but what's to say that he'd be retained by a new coach? Had an opportunity to go to the Bengals, who with one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and potentially be a playoff team and go to that defense with their new defensive coordinator. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it that makes sense. So in any event, my contention is with New Orleans, the situation is very bad. This isn't, when we talked about Joe Brady, people said, the optics of the Saints job. It's not optics. It's reality. This isn't just the perception. This is your actual reality. You are a bad job. Your cap situation's bad. Your roster's bad. You're old. It's not a good situation, which is why you're having a hard time being attractive to the top candidates. But in this instance of these guys who are currently on staff taking other jobs, I think that's less they're trying to get out of New Orleans and more they know when a new coach comes in, they're probably going to be out of a job anyway. So if you have a chance to take a job now, you take the job now. So I don't read too much into Klint Kubiak or Michael Hodges or Declan Doyle taking other jobs. It's probably a smart thing to do because they were probably going to be out of a job at New Orleans. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.